During our time for meditation, I asked you all to think about those special people in your life who have loved you into being. And whenever I do this practice, I inevitably have a constellation of lovely people to envision. But I often think of one person, a friend and a former high school teacher, Mr. King. Fred Rogers used to like to say that attitudes are caught, not taught. Well, Mr. King did not teach history. He loved history in front of us. And that gave me, at the very least, a lifelong love of history and a safe haven in the tempestuous years of high school. As a teacher and as a friend, he was very good at practicing that beautiful skill of listening with his ears and with his heart. So when I was applying to seminary, I asked him to write me a letter of recommendation. And in his letter, he wrote that he hoped that I would carry on the meaningful work of Mother Teresa and Fred Rogers.
No pressure.
Right? I found this interesting. Fred Rogers is this cultural icon, well known for kindness, but it was strange to place him on the same list as this saint who had given her whole life to helping the world's poorest of the poor. In high school, Mr. King had this huge poster of Fred Rogers in front of his classroom, and it's probably because we were at that age where we wanted so desperately to be treated as adults that we thought of the poster as kind of a joke. Well, reading this letter and loving history, I decided to learn more about Mr. Rogers. And in him, I saw refracted through my friend and mentor many of the lessons that he was trying to bring to children everywhere. I felt the influence that Mr. Rogers had on children and on their parents, and I understood his ministry as one of curiosity and love. Today, as we celebrate Pride Month, we face a national assault on the rights of transgender people. In the highest offices of the country, trans people are being codified into law as inherently dishonorable and undisciplined. And states who do the bare minimum of affirming transgender youth are being treated with a loss of school lunch programs and a loss of funding. The most powerful people in the world are laser focused on a small percentage of youth. And all around us are these think pieces written by adults talking about trans children and their cisgender peers. And what is almost always missing from these statements and conversations is the voices of those children themselves. One of the most important and vital things that Fred Rogers taught on his television program is the importance of listening. He says, listening is a very active awareness of the coming together of at least two lives. Listening, as far as I am concerned, is certainly a prerequisite of love. One of the most essential ways of saying I love you is being a receptive listener. Mr. Rogers listened to children. He taught himself how to listen, both by being fully present to and aware of the children he interacted with, making sure, as he would say, that his questions were as meaningful as his answers, and by working alongside child psychologists who made it their life's work to study the needs and inner worlds of children. And I want to give you two examples of this, of how he would listen, how fully and deeply he would listen, and how seriously he would listen. The first example is that one child told him that he was afraid of taking a bath. And so Mr. Rogers talked this through with him and asked him questions and determined that he feared taking a bath because he was afraid that when the drain was unplugged, he would be sucked down the drain. Mr. Rogers took the child's concern very seriously because while the thing that he feared was not necessarily real, that fear was real. And so he produced a whole show on it. And he sings the song, and I am not a singer, but he sings the song. You can never go down, never go down the drain. You're bigger than the water. You're bigger than the soap. You're much bigger than all the bubbles, and you're bigger than your telescope. So you see, you can never go down your drain. And later, many parents came to him and thanked him for that episode, because apparently this fear is way more widespread than many of us knew. And it helped these parents talk this through with their children. A bit more serious of an example, later in the 1980s, several groups alleging to be concerned about children began searching for satanic influences in children's entertainment and video games and music. This is the so-called Satanic Panic. Dungeons and Dragons, which is a tabletop role-playing game where players imagine themselves as adventurers in fantasy worlds and use narrative and rules and dice to tell these stories with each other, this Dungeons and Dragons came under attack by these groups. Now, Fred was also concerned about what children were exposed to on television and in their media. But his approach was to listen and observe children, to speak with child psychologists about the inner needs of children. And he conceived of this notion of play as vital to the healthy development of children. In play, children learn to become confident. They learn to see the world as a place that they can influence and change, and they come to understand themselves and others better. And he worried about the influence of video games, what he called mechanical entertainment. But he didn't worry so much about the content of the video games. You see, he believed that play was an opportunity for children to bend the world toward their imagination. And he worried that so many video games forced the child to fit their imagination into the video games world, rather than open up the scope of their imagination. But unlike the folks bothered by Dungeons and Dragons, Fred observed two children interacting over the game, and he listened. And here's what he found. He says, "There is another type of game children are playing now, and it seems to have a powerful fascination for them. These games are played in children's heads, and players make up what happens as they go along. The games may be set in old-time dungeons inhabited by mythological creatures, or they may be set in some far-off future. They do have rules, but the rules are guidelines that the children can adapt and alter as they see fit. The games have to be played with other human beings. Children can learn how from one another. They don't have to buy anything, and they don't need to spend money. A child is on a long journey, and he recently found himself sitting next to another boy who was familiar with these games. That's how they whiled away the time. But more than making time pass, they made friends." I think this is a particularly poignant example and significant. I think that the general population really only became aware of Dungeons and Dragons through this moral panic that was surrounding it. And there was so much noise about protecting children from the dangerous influences of these games. But Mr. Rogers didn't let that noise inhibit his vision, because his vision was actually attuned to being with children, to listening to them, and not listening to the news or the purveyors of good taste. He listened to children. He listened to child psychologists. And he determined that creative and collaborative play was vital to a child's growth, and he saw the potential of that growth in these games. Listening is a prerequisite to love. I believe that we are now living through a moral panic about the existence of transgender people and transgender children. There is so much noise and so much scrutiny over our bodies, our actions, our very existence. And the most powerful people in the world are attacking entire populations over the existence of just a handful of out transgender children. And so I think of Mr. Rogers' response to Dungeons and Dragons during that other moral panic. What would he be doing right now? I believe he'd be listening to the children. He would be listening to the transgender children. And I just want us to think for 1 second of how impressive it is for a child that in a world since the very day they were born, assigned to them a gender, and that gender is constantly reinforced all around them through the clothes they are provided, through the names that they carry, through the pronouns affixed to them, the colors they're told to like, the toys they are bought, the restrooms they use, presumptive friend groups. I just want to imagine how impressive it is that that child does the extremely difficult work of introspection. They feel that something is wrong, something's not right, and against all the expectations of the world, they sit with themselves and figure it out. And then that child finds the bravery and the trust to give this part of themselves to an adult. What an honor it must be to be that adult. And this is a monumental task for anyone at any age. Mr. Rogers tells us, in times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts. Coming out is a stressful event for both the person coming out and their interlocutor. But one of the greatest gifts that you can give anybody is the gift of your honest self. One transgender child was interviewed and they said, "Even before I came out, I got the sense that no matter what happened, I would be unconditionally loved by my parents and siblings. Being trans is not a choice. It's a choice to come out, but being trans is not a choice. It wasn't like one day I woke up and felt that the way the wind blew and wanted to be a girl. I always knew I wasn't a boy. It wasn't what I wanted to be a girl. I was a girl. I just had to put that into words and explain it." This child's experience, the experience of knowing love and support regardless of what you say, gave them the courage to express that part of themselves. And that expression helped the others around her love her into being. Is this not what we want for the children of our society? To feel safe in their attachments at home? To feel the joy of freedom in discovering truth and meaning closest to themselves? Is this not a vision we want for society? Mr. Rogers taught us that anything that is human is mentionable and therefore manageable. When we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. He teaches us that the most important thing we can do for our society is to help every single child know that they are loved, that their feelings are valid and real, and that they experience a sense of inclusion in our world. So I say, imagine if, in this moral panic, in this so-called concern for children, if we started listening to them first. What a wise and free people we would be. Recently, a transgender teenager competed in a track event in a school in Maine, and she won her high school event, but politicians and news covered the event with the venom and rage that you can imagine. And they placed their assumptions and their sense of what was right without actually listening to the actual teenagers involved. And they fretted that something was stolen from the cisgender girl who placed second, but they didn't listen to her. So she wrote an op-ed. And she says, in part, "The fact that someone finished in front of me didn't diminish the happiness I felt after I finished the race. I don't feel like anything was taken from me. No one was harmed by the trans girl's participation, but we are all harmed by the hateful rhetoric of bullies who want to take away sports from some kid just for who they are." What bravery and sportsmanship this young woman showed. Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister, but he never ever spoke of this on his show. He didn't want any child to feel excluded, but of his ministry, he would say, "I consider what I do through Mr. Rogers' neighborhood as my ministry. A ministry doesn't have to be only through a church or even through an ordination. And I think we can all minister to others in this world by being compassionate and caring. I hope you will feel good enough about yourself that you will want to minister to others, and that you will find your own unique ways to do that." So, at a time when the most powerful people in the world are using that power to silence children, to attempt to chase trans people back into their closets and to erase us, I think Rogers bestows upon us an imperative. He tells us, we live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say, it's not my child, not my community, not my world, not my problem. But then there are those who see the need and respond. I consider those people my heroes. Trans kids are under attack from people who claim to care for children without listening to them. So in a time when power is being used to silence them, it is more important now than ever to listen to them and to love those children into the fullness of their beings. Let us all, let every child know that they made today a special day by just their being them.